case of the Shir is Zecher Nishmas Miriam Chana Bas Yontif, Neshama Shabbaliyah on the Shloshim of her Patira. Where we left off last week was at this point of freedom of religion, and what I wanted to basically develop was, I think that there is a Torah concept that's somewhat related to freedom of religion, to the American or Canadian concept of freedom of religion, that there is something that's a Torah equivalent. And where we ended up last week, and I think that's important for us to develop it, because I think it's important for us, if we're going to work with a value, we have to know how we can look at that value. So we have a foreign value, theoretically, freedom of religion. How can we look at it? And what I developed last week, I believe, was the concept that really it's the reality of doubt, in the sense that we recognize, I think that there's a perception that really comes out of much more Christian thought, that good and evil is faith versus doubt. And if you doubt, it's an indication of some type of evil, right? If you don't believe, you're evil, and so forth and so forth. The fact is from our perspective, doubt is a reality. It really reflects a weakness in the human being. I don't know. That's not a weakness in a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's a weakness in my ability to know. It's reflective of the human condition. And I pointed out sources last week that really point to the fact that full rishus in Judaism is built upon a concept of kfira, not just doubt. Kfira basically meaning that I deny, but stronger than deny, it's almost like I do not want you, God, imposing your will in my life. Okay, but it really starts with kfira. And there's a couple things that I think are very indicative of the way I define doubt. Is that doubt is a recognition of a lack of value, a lack of ability in the human being, right? It's my inability to know. And the truth is, all human beings by definition don't know. They don't know everything. Okay? The only one who knows everything is the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And when Moshe Rabbeinu says, I want to understand, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, you can't, because you're human. And therefore you can't know everything. And therefore, as you're moving ahead, there's an aspect of our inability to know actually has a value. So there's two pieces I actually developed along this concept that I put out in response to two events in Jewish history. One was something I wrote in response to the Rabin assassination. Okay, and basically I titled the piece I wrote, Lefi Aniyas Daiti. And the truth is if you ever look in terms of people when they write Talmudic works or something like that, a lot of times the person will begin with saying Lefi Aniyas Daiti, which is according to the poverty of my thought, according to my inabilities, which is a remarkable statement of anivas, of humility. When you say I don't know, it really should bring about humility. And the fact is I felt that a lot of what happened in response to a lot of what motivated the Rabin assassination was people who were absolutely sure. And the truth is that being absolutely sure is a problem, which leads to the other article I wrote, which was in response to 9/11, which was called In the Name of Religion. And the reality is, again, what you ran into are people who are so sure that they were right? They're getting the 70 virgins, that they blew up 2,000 people. Okay, so the fact is surety is a problem. So the point is that if there's a Jewish correlation to freedom of religion, it's a fact that doubt makes you recognize that you don't know everything. Okay? And therefore there's an attitude that basically says, I don't know what to do. I have a friend of mine who once pointed out, that was a very interesting statement. He said that he could understand people dying in the name of religion, but what he really can't understand is people killing others in the name of religion. Because there's one thing for me to sacrifice my own life because of my belief, but for me to actually impose to kill others for my belief, that's that he finds extremely difficult. That he would have a very hard time to do if he was told to kill. Now the truth is, if you think back to the Akeda situation, and the whole thing of faith and leap of faith and so forth and so forth. I think that Judaism has a little bit of a problem with the leap of faith idea, in the sense that I don't think Avraham had a leap of faith. I think Avraham was absolutely certain that God was talking to him, to the extent that he can understand it, and that it was so certain, it was as certain as anything he went through. He had, according to the Midrashim, he had angels walking around. He already talked about with the Kodesh Baruch Hu with stone. He had this event and that event. Angels came and told him that Yitzchak was going to be born and all these things. So you're not talking about someone who has a sort of like faith in a surrealistic way. You're talking about someone who absolutely had every reason to believe this to be true, and that's what leads him. So the argument why he sacrifices, why he does the Akeda, is not just simply because it's a faith aspect. It's knowledge. It's absolutely knowledge for him. The question is how do you balance that knowledge? And the truth is I think the only way to really understand the faith argument, or the only way to really understand the Akeda, is in contradistinction to stone, where Avraham challenges God on ethical issues. Anyways, that to me is an aspect that we can live with freedom of religion, and that question of what would we do if we took over an Eretz Yisrael. Okay, the fact is I think that we have the possibility to have a place for pluralistic tolerance in the modern world because of the reality of doubt. Okay, so that gives us an ability to relate to the value of freedom of religion with some semblance of understanding it and giving it. So we're not dealing with some foreign value that's totally that we're taking advantage of. Okay, we have different attitudes as we talked about last week and so forth. Yeah.
But I think there are people, I think, who are, if they're speaking in the name of religion, like this, we know this because of whatever. They have assumed that there is no doubt.
Yeah,
and they're quite certain of that. And others that say supposedly could have the same description of it, say that they are doing the right thing and so on. They can have some very different values and approaches.
But the fact is I think that once you start accepting the value of doubt, then you really have problems with people who are so sure. I think that one of the realities of this concept, and I think it really permeates an attitude, let's say, even within the frum world, and the attitude outside the frum world. But like for example, I think that the reality of your own inability to know, which can reflect in doubt, should make you somewhat questioning of yourself.
Or offensive. Should make you somewhat of offensive.
Well, I don't think you can be a fencer in a halachic realm. You have to take stands in halacha. You have to take stands. But I think that the most you can say is, like I say, lefi aniyas daiti. I am called upon to make decisions halachically. Okay, so I have to act because I'm called upon to make decisions. However, if you tell me that I should believe that my decisions are 100% correct, that to me is problematic. And I think that that's where you have the idea of this value of doubt or value of questioning yourself makes you not so adamant. I've said this before, that the thing that there's a lot of reasons people have problem with the Mashiachas, the Lubavitcher Mashiachas who say the Rebbe was Mashiach, and in Eretz Yisrael there's people who actually, they don't say Adonenu Morenu Rabbeinu, they say Adonenu Morenu Uborenu, which is an even bigger problem. They're called the Borenu Mashiachas. And the thing that drives me crazy about it is the amount of ego that you must have to take a position that this is the truth, that the Rebbe is Mashiach, when there's so many people around saying, hey, there's arguments against it. He died, so forth and so forth. Doubt is the thing that keeps you in line with saying, I'm not God. I can't make a decision. Or you're right, you can't be a fence sitter. You have to make some decisions. But doubt makes you recognize your own inabilities. Now that to me is a Torah perspective on freedom of religion. I don't know if that's what the architects of the freedom of religion concept came up with. They might have had a different argument. They might have also. I think that they came out of atheism. They thought all religions were crazy, anyways, which we're going to get into, which really defends more the argument of freedom from religion, the freedom of religion. I want to talk about the distinction between those two ideas tonight a little bit. But the fact is that Judaism sees some value in the concept of freedom of religion because of this idea that you should have a little bit of questioning of yourself, which we can define as doubt. Okay? Now, it should not be the kind of doubt that totally destroys you and the ability of acting. There's an interesting article by Rabbi Norman Lamb has an article on faith and doubt. The fact is that it's not doubt that says everything's okay. That you don't have to follow halacha, but the fact is he's saying the person committed to halacha can have a little bit of doubt, just the reality of the situation, of reality of life. And there's nothing wrong with it. And I'm taking, and he doesn't really talk about it, but I'm taking it one step further. That says that there is a value in having some doubt, not to the extent of making you not follow halacha and so forth, but making you question yourself, which creates a way of relating to a pluralistic society.
It's like somebody I know once said, I live orthodox. I think conservative, and I wish I was reformed.
I don't think we're supposed to think conservative. The fact is that see, my own perception is that let's say I have made a decision that I believe that in Torah Misinai. Okay. If you ask me to prove it 100%, I can't. If you ask me for my reasons why I believe, on balance of probability and so forth, that that something happened at that mountain, I can give you some of my ideas. Are they proofs like I can prove objectively? No. But we make decisions based upon our own subjective perceptions. There's intuitions. There's reality is as I tell people, I'm obviously biased, right? If I was brought up in Timbuktu, who knows if I would have come to the same conclusions? But the fact is that these are the decisions I make for myself. The one thing that I do believe is that someone who says to me, "Well, I don't believe it," okay, I'm not going to judge that person. Because Baruch Hu is the judge and not me. But the fact is that I can see someone taking another position, and that what enables me to relate to that person not as an evildoer, but as a person also struggling with trying to find the truth. See what you see. I got a little bit. See, the problem is the first issue that I had, and I think I spent time on it, is that if you just project the value of freedom of religion and say we've benefited from it, very, very nice. But the point is how do I have to know how I'm relating to, if I'm benefiting from that value and live within that value and say, oh, this value is good, I have to have an idea of this value. If I really think that if I was setting up a country, I would never have such a value, right? I am against it, then why am I using it? Why do I really have I think of freedom of religion as a good value. We Jews have benefited from it. So I have to put it into a Torah perspective.
But you're describing it in all your discussions over the last few weeks as an absolute value.
You're right, and that's what I want to get further into tonight. The fact is that what I'm trying to say is that we have a perception of a value. And I think that we as Orthodox Jews have to have a Torah take on this value as we start talking about it. So what I'm trying to do is say, okay, here's the Torah take. Okay, we don't know everything. Okay, therefore our society is pluralistic, and really what it comes down to is from my perspective, and I don't know if they use the exact same language, but we can't know the truth. Now this is where it gets into a little bit of an issue. We cannot know the truth.
Wait a minute, let me have some of my clarification for knowing the truth. You could say everyone cannot know what the truth is.
Yes.
This is the truth.
You're right.
On the other hand, one can perhaps practice the truth in some way.
Right.
He just doesn't know that this is the truth.
Okay. What I'm saying is we cannot say definitively that we know the entire truth. We have weaknesses in our ability to know. The problem with that yields, and this is the problem with freedom of religion, is that if you can't define the truth, then you have a problem with also defining what's right and wrong, and that's our problem. Okay, like in terms of the abortion issue, if we cannot define whether a fetus is life, okay, and because how do you have criteria for life? The argument is criteria for life is just basically the biological function, or is the ability to live on their own or something like that. Whatever it is, the argument is that those people who are pro-choice are basically saying it's not a human being, it's not a life, and their argument is because it's not an autonomous living being. Okay, the fetus cannot live on its own. Okay, at least in the early stages of life. That's one of their arguments. Well,
that may also be true in the word baby, by the way.
Yeah, that may be true.
Or a paraplegic adult.
Right. Those are where you start getting to issues, and there are people who have argued, that gets into issues of defining life. It's also a matter of getting into issues of quality of life and stuff like that. But the point is you get into an issue of what is the definition of life. That there is something wrong with ceasing that life. Now the point is, if I can't know the truth, if I say I have no way or I am limited in my ability to understand, then the result is I am limited in my ability to define right and wrong. And that's really what comes out in a pluralistic society. When you had Christian Spain, Catholic Spain, it was very straightforward why Torquemada wanted to kick all the Jews out of Spain. He wanted to kick all the non-Catholics out of Spain, kick the Muslims out of Spain, he kicked everyone out. Why? Because he wanted a monolithic society. Everyone knew what was right and wrong. Now, therefore, if that guy over there did something wrong, then everyone knows that it's evil. They didn't want to deal with people who basically said, and that's why the Inquisition became really, really strong, right? When all the non-believers left, because a Jew would sit there and say, "I don't believe." So the point is that they would say, "Listen, I disagree with your definition of right and wrong. Okay, I just don't believe this, so there's something different." But the fact is that I want a monolithic society that everyone agrees about what the truth is. So therefore, everyone agrees what's right and wrong. And I don't want any challenges in that. Therefore, we know this person did that, it's wrong. And the whole society says it's wrong. But in a pluralistic society, when you're dealing with we don't know what the truth is, or we have limitations in our ability to know the truth, you're going to end up with an issue of what are the definitions of right and wrong. And therefore, we as from Jews who have strong definitions of right and wrong, how do we deal in a society that basically is allowing us, and this is the dilemma, is allowing us to observe our definition of right and wrong because it's sort of accepting a lot of other people's definitions of right and wrong. So our definition of right and wrong is accepted within a plethora of other definitions of right and wrong. So what we're doing is we're arguing we can follow our definition of right and wrong because we live in a society that allows people to make their own decisions about right and wrong. Okay? And that becomes, how do we deal with that? Because their decision of right and wrong may be a viewpoint that we find problematic. And it also gets into an issue is how does society itself function that way? Because you would really have a society where every group in a society makes its own definition of right and wrong. Well, the society itself will be problematic, because the society itself usually has to have some standards that everyone has to agree by. It's like just take driving a car, right? Let's say you have it's my religious belief that cars should go at 100 Ks on any street. It's my religious belief that cars should go not over 20 Ks on any street, right? Well, the fact is, freedom of religion, you can drive at 100 K and you can drive at 20 K. Well, what you have is a mess on the roads, right? And if you apply, obviously I'm being so much facetious, but the fact is, the guy who's driving 100 K say, hey, it's okay for do this, but that's where you start getting into issues. Okay, so we now want to get into, and I'll give you some examples where you get into some issues where you start having this type of problem, because what happens is the society itself has to develop its own standard as well, and that's something where you find it in the American founding fathers. They really said you had to develop a secularist society. So basically, they argued for secular values. Okay, so they basically said freedom. We have to have values that are secular. So what are secular values? So secular values are basically values that come about from reason. Okay, and that really explains a little bit of the issue with evolution. Okay, in the evolution issue, the people who are arguing, the creationists are arguing, well, why don't we just allow creation to be taught in the school? If you have your theory of evolution, well, we have our theory of creation, so why can't you teach our theory as your theory? It's just another theory, because the theory of evolution is a totally secular theory. It develops out of reason, it develops out of science. Creation is a reason that emerges from revelation. So that's why you get the creationists arguing for intelligent design. Well, then you get into the issue that once you bring up a God idea, then you start going to questions, well, is that rational or not, so on and so forth, supernatural or whatever. But that's really what you're getting down to. In the States, you're saying, hey, you can talk creation, you can have your own schools of creation, but if you're going to have a public school, separation of church and state means that the decision of what goes on in the secular school has to only be by rational methodologies. You can't use aspects of revelation. So really, what you're dealing with is this tension that I, as a Orthodox Jew, and someone who believes in a revelational concept. Okay? So, on one hand, my belief in a revelational concept puts me in the situation where I have to argue to defend my own ability to apply revelational concept in my own life. I have to argue for the right of others to defend their revelational concept. Right? Otherwise, if I challenge their revelational concept, then I will end up with my own difficulty. Okay? Because then I'll be challenging my own rights. But at the same point in time, I also have to recognize that society itself needs some common structure, and that common structure is going to be, things that are shared rationally. This is and this becomes an issue. I'll give you an example of an issue. In terms of secular values versus religious values and so forth. I have something I wrote here a while back. It's freedom of religion and aspects of halachic tolerance. And if you just look at the first story, there was a letter in the Toronto Star from a woman who basically argued about the problems she has as a woman when she attends an Orthodox synagogue. She's a member of an Orthodox synagogue. And she has the value of Orthodoxy saying you need mechitza, but on the other hand, it challenges another value, which is a value of women's rights. Okay? So she says, so that this is the battle in the sense that she buys society's values of women's rights. Women's rights come out of rationalism. Therefore, it permeates society, and therefore becomes very strong in society. And it's a value that is supported by that seems to be argued against it. We're arguing against the women's rights in the shul by saying you take down the mechitza, by arguing revelation. So that's what makes it a little bit more. So our argument is we can have the mechitza because we believe in this revelation. But to what extent are we going to allow revelation to allow us to negate the rational arguments? I'll give you another example. Mila. Right? Okay, so you have a whole movement that now is coming up trying to argue for Mila to be prevented because the baby has no choice, the male baby has no choice, and it's attack upon the male it's abuse of the male baby. Well, what do you do with female circumcision? It's what they call female circumcision, right? Which is practiced. I've read different ideas of it. There's some people say that it actually does have a place in Islam. Other people say it doesn't have a place in Islam. But some people argue it's part of their religious beliefs and so forth and so forth. So you hear about an individual who wants to have the right to practice female circumcision. How do you respond to this person? Right? So the general movement in society now is to outlaw it. Right? I believe female circumcision is considered to be abuse. It's outlawed. On one level, I'm very happy about that. I find it abusive, and I think I personally find it abusive, and so forth and so forth. But I have a bit of a problem because people are using the same argument against my argument that I want to be able to practice male circumcision.
But there's a difference.
Yes.
Because with a woman, it's extremely painful and it affects her life. With a male, it doesn't.
Excuse me, I'll be the judge of that. I'm a male.
And in fact, it's proven to be beneficial.
Well, you see, first of all,
so there's a difference in just
well, you see, the argument you're giving is you're trying to bring the argument into the rational world. In other words, what you're saying is first of all, when you argue it's beneficial, right, to the child, that's part of the argument now. As long as there was medical arguments to say the male circumcision was okay, then we can argue it in the rational world. We're doing it because because the Torah says to do it. We're doing it for religious reasons. But if we go to the rational, the secular individual, we have an argument to defend it because we can say it's beneficial to the boy, and there's nothing about female circumcision is beneficial to the girl. However, what has developed in the last few years is arguments that it's not beneficial to the boy. There's other arguments that are coming out and say it's actually negative to the male. Now the truth is their argument is, and I don't think there's any way of proving this or not, but their argument is that it lessens the ability for sexual enjoyment by the male due to the removal of the foreskin. And there's this whole argument that's developing. So there are individuals, if you go on the web, you'll find that there are organizations of individuals who were mauled as kids, who are now protesting that they were mauled and it ruined their sex lives. Now, we just can reject it. How do you know? But the fact is, the Rambam says it. The Rambam actually says in the Gemara that one of the reasons for male circumcision is, his language is to lessen sexual interest in the male. And he says there's in the same way as a broken bone. He says when you break a leg, your leg is never as strong as it was before it was broken. He says the same thing with Mila. Okay, once you damage that organ, it will never be as strong as if it wasn't damaged, and that's the very point of Mila in order to lessen. So that's the same argument that is used for female circumcision, and that's the Rambam saying about male circumcision. So the truth is you have to be. The argument that comes up now. The truth is the reason we do is because Kosh Baruch Hu said to do it. It's basically a revelational aspect. I know that when my boys were mauled, okay, I didn't look. I think that when my kids ever have children, if they ever ask me a Sunday, I'm going to try and figure out every way not to be a Sunday, because I don't want to be there. I don't want to see it. I really have a difficulty with it.
Was God there with you?
What?
Were you aware, mindful of the presence of God at the?
I don't know if I'm mindful ever of the presence of God. The fact is that I did what I thought was what God wanted me to do. I wanted to make sure my kid was mauled.
You and Avraham
Okay.
Avinu.
What?
You and Avraham Avinu.
Right, except Avraham actually did it. But the fact is that, and there are people who hold that really a father should do it. But the fact is that the argument that you were presenting in terms of Mila is how we can defend Mila in a secular environment, because we're trying to present arguments according to their system. Okay, but the fact is the reason Mila becomes an issue like female circumcision is that's the dilemma. There's two dilemmas that are going on over here. When we say freedom of religion, we're saying you should be able to practice your religion. Well, if that's true, then anyone who says for freedom of religion that they should be allowed to circumcise their daughters, I'm only using that term because it really is, or to mutilate their daughters for freedom of religion, we'd have problems with that. And we do have problems with that. We don't say that's okay, because it's such an affront to the secular value of reason that this is wrong. Okay? But the fact is that once you start saying, no, you can't do that even though your religion says you have to do it, then you're running into a problem. Well, someone's going to come back and say that to us. So therefore we have to try and say, and we're caught in that dilemma. We don't want to go totally, because we do know that there are secular values that we actually support. So in a certain way, at some freedom of religion issue, we would sit there and say, gee, we're concerned about that freedom of religion because of our sense being in line with the secular value as well as being as our own religious value. But the fact is you have to be aware that you're challenging the freedom of religion power. On the other hand, we also have a respect for rational thought, okay, and for the results of natural morality, and that's what makes these issues difficult. That's a real issue in terms of gay rights now. In gay rights, it's becoming an issue because in New York State, there's laws that you have to teach against discrimination in the classroom, and part of non-discrimination is homophobia and so forth in gay rights. So the truth of the matter is, in discriminating against a person because they're gay, that's not really a problem. For me, because someone happens to have a same-sex orientation, okay, so that I shouldn't be discriminated against. That everyone says. But the fact that I'm saying it's okay, or the argument for same-sex rights leading to therefore same-sex marriage should be okay, that becomes somewhat of an issue. But the fact is that's being propelled by secular thought. So the fact is that we're arguing, well, freedom of religion, and this is what happened in New York State. In the New York State issue is that from schools in New York State are saying freedom of religion, we should be allowed to express our anti-homosexual behavior attitudes as part of freedom of religion. But that's going up against the argument against discrimination based upon gay rights. Okay, and issues. That's why I gave out that article in terms of women's rights, where people are arguing, hey, women's rights and the Hecht is problematic. But I heard, by the way, I heard that was something that happened in the Rabbi synagogue here. That if you go into the Rabbi, there's this attitude that they are orthodox but egalitarian. And I was told that it was actually part of an Ontario. And I don't know how true it is, but I was told that the human rights of Ontario came back and said, hey, you're Orthodox synagogues, but you still have to treat women equally. And there's issues to that accord for us. I mean, the Canadian law has an exemption for rabbis not having to marry same-sex couples. Okay, and the shul doesn't have to have same-sex couples. But if you have a kosher catering hall out there, okay, and a person says we want to have the same-sex marriage in the catering hall, it's not so simple that a kosher catering establishment would not have to cater the same-sex marriage.
Belly dances at the weddings in Israel.
Yeah.
Belly dances were part of the halftime show.
Right.
And the rabbi said, no, I'm taking away your Hecht show.
Right.
You're going to have belly
Right.
dances.
Right. But you see, in Israel, you get away with it a little bit, but over here, you got that in New York also. A Hechter authority can sit there and say, listen, we're not under any obligation to give a Hechter. We can set our own standards. See, Hechters we have standards and we can set our own standards. But the problem with law is that you can't discriminate against same-sex couples. That's considered to be discrimination. Okay, against the law. Okay, it's okay. Therefore, if I want to use your place to have my wedding, okay, if you say no, it's like a person, a black, let's say a black person and a white person want to get married. They go into a hall and say, I want to get married. If the hall says no, I'm not going to marry you because you're black, I don't marry interracial marriages, you can get in trouble for that. So that's the same situation over there. Now, shuls are specifically exempted, but kosher catering halls aren't. Now, you may say that's not going to come up and so forth and so forth. I know of situations where there are gay couples getting married who, aside from the fact that they're gay couples, in every other way, they almost are like Orthodox. Shomer Shabbos and so forth and so forth.
What about the other side of the coin? By insisting that I marry or have these people in my home, you're infringing on my religious rights. That's the issue. That's exactly the issue. So the problem is that's why I'm defining the way. The fact is that you have the idea of secular rights, secular values developing. In other words, what's occurred, and this really leads into, this gets into the difference between freedom from religion and freedom of religion. So here's final handout for today. Okay, just the difference between France and the U.S. There is a difference of freedom of religion and freedom from religion. When France outlawed the burqa, France came out and said that any conspicuous religious symbols in public schools cannot be worn. So what they basically said was that Muslim women can't wear the hijabs and the burqas in the French schools. Jewish boys cannot wear kippot, and Catholics can't wear large crosses, which are conspicuous. Their argument was, it wasn't freedom of religion, it was freedom from religion. And that's really what the development of freedom of the freedom of religion really came from. What occurred historically is that you had the Catholic Church basically imposing its values on the Catholic world or the Christian world or whatever. And its values were based upon revelation. Or they said it was based on revelation. It wasn't reason, it was supernatural.
what occurred with the development of the French Revolution was that the rationalists were saying that we don't want you imposing your supernatural values on us. And that was the argument of freedom from religion. In other words, obviously a society needs values, and we're going to develop secular values. And therefore they turned to Voltaire, Voltaire and Rousseau. These are people who are major figures in development of rational values, of the values of reason, which developed the idea in terms of the states and so forth. And that's where the states also got into it. We want a secular society, which is values are developed only through reason. So you had this force of the values of reason. Then what occurs is that what we're basically saying is any imposition on these values that emerge from a person saying, God told me, get out of here. We don't want any aspect of these values that are based upon some supernatural voice having a say. And that's really what happened with this law in France. And the people came and said, we're arguing for freedom from religion. We don't want religion to have a voice in the values of the society. Then there was another side. But you, in your own private life, we're going to let you do what you want to do. Freedom of religion, as long as you don't bother us. So if you want to keep kosher, there's nothing to hate. But if our society thinks that it's wrong to kill animals through shechita, well, too bad. Because we're not going to give you freedom. We're not arguing freedom of religion. We want freedom from religion. We don't want religion to have a voice in the development of our society. If our society wants to develop an idea that it's cruel to kill animals that way, and that's the value of our society, we're not going to let you get away with it because of your religion. Okay? If you want to live something by your own life, that's over. That's a freedom from religion perspective. Freedom of religion basically says, well, and that's one of the tensions: secular values of society versus religious reasons. Freedom of religion basically said, we're going to let you practice your religion, and it became a tension up until a certain point. So if we only followed freedom from religion, then I don't think Jews and Catholics would be able to be exempt from prohibition. We think it's wrong for people to drink. We think it's terrible for our society. Your religion tells you to drink. We don't care what your religion says. Okay? If it doesn't bother us, we'll let you get away with it. But we have our secular values. Then comes about this idea of freedom of religion, which basically says, we as a society are going to let you follow your religion. But the fact is, we're only going to let you follow your religion up to a certain point. And that's a tension. We're going to let you follow your religion, like the Doukhobors in BC. We're not going to let them follow. If their religion says to burn down places, we're not going to let you burn down places. If it was some pagan cult who said, hey, we want to do animal sacrifices, we're not going to let you get away with it because of freedom of religion. Because we have our own values. So this becomes part of the tension. That on one hand, we as from Jews are arguing for freedom of religion because we want to be allowed to practice our religion. We also want to have an idea of freedom from religion because we don't want to be imposed upon by some other religion. On the other hand, we also respect the concept of natural morality. And when natural morality starts giving an idea, we can respect it. So now we have these different tensions of morality, and now we run into issues. And then we have to start arguing. We have to know when to argue our way within secular ideas. So in terms of Mila, we could say freedom of religion, but then we're going to run into an argument where secular people will say, hey, you don't have the right to impose your values upon others. Example would be the witnesses not giving a blood transfusion to one of their kids. Well, if you don't want to take a blood transfusion, because that's freedom of religion, we'll let you do it, but not for you to impose upon. What happens? They make the kid a ward of the state, right, and says, okay, we're applying secular values because our values save the kid's life. and we're not going to let your freedom of religion impose upon that. Now, the point is that there are people who are basically saying, and it should be the same law by Milah. But the problem is that we start getting into an issue. So the truth is that if we start saying, hey, it makes sense for people to say, and this is the tension we feel as Jews. On one hand, we sit there and say, hey, listen, you got to save the kid's life. It's a kid, some of that. But if we do that, we're challenging freedom of religion, right? Which can come back to haunt us, because the same argument used with Milah. Then we have to figure out, well, Milah is different because for rational reasons. So it's no longer freedom of religion. We're saying it's this argument. And then we start getting the argument between doctors and so forth, and it becomes an issue with let's say, it becomes an issue with Mitzitza B'Peh. And people don't recognize the issue of Mitzitza B'Peh becomes a similar issue. Because we're talking about, people are saying, it's our religion, you have to use Mitzitza B'Peh. Fine. It's our religion, you have to use Mitzitza B'Peh. Okay, we consider it to be dangerous. We think it's wrong to do Mitzitza. I mean, I'm saying there are people, because I'm within that camp, but I'm trying to say there's people who say, listen, you should do Mitzitza B'Peh. Right? It's dangerous. So we have a halachic argument. But if someone says, I want to do Mitzitza B'Peh, we really feel the dilemma. On one hand, if we say the law is okay to forbid Mitzitza B'Peh, we have a problem. Because we're not letting these people follow religion, and we want to protect the right of freedom of religion. On the other hand, we understand where the world's coming from in terms of saying, hey, wait a second, because rationally you do want to protect the kid's life, and we also feel halachically like that. But those people feel differently. So these are the kind of tensions you have in terms of an Orthodox mindset in dealing with these issues. They come up all the time. But it really gets into the issue that if you say you're not sure, you have questions of doubt on the truth, we don't know, it really does yield the fact that you start having doubt of really knowing what's right and what's wrong. So this leads into issues from our perspective of Elu ve'elu, but and then outside Elu ve'elu, and so forth and so forth. But that's really the issue that we're dealing with in so many ways, in terms of our world. And that what it comes down to is, how do we take stands in the world? And that's why we have to be very careful about an abortion stand, or about same-sex marriages. We're going to talk more about that the next couple of weeks, in the sense of, you got to be careful where the stand comes from. If our stand is, we're against abortion because the Torah says abortion, then wait a second. That is, we want to say no to abortion because we want to impose our religious perspectives on this society. Well, that could lead to a problem in other ways, because then someone else wants to impose their religious perspective on their side. It may affect us. On the other hand, if we turn around and say no, we're not against abortion, then we start having issues of saying, what do we do?
Tolerating lifestyle abortion.
Right? Yeah, we tolerate and things that, and then really what it comes down to is we have to start understanding how to formulate our arguments in rational ways, not just in its Torah arguments, but rational ways, and that becomes a whole issue in itself. Okay, and a lot of people don't do that, especially to same-sex marriages. Come up with a rational argument why you're against same-sex marriages. Not because the Torah says it, but you have to come up with an argument that will have some voice in a secular world.